Okay, so I'm going to talk about context, and it's some missing context that we've got at the moment. And what I'm going to talk about isn't perhaps direct to consumers. It's bigger than that. It's getting everybody to understand this context, because there are lots of influences of consumers, and we need to get this information to consumers through various channels. I also want to talk about, I believe that pasture is the best. But milk is good, there is better milk, and then there is best. And I want you to appreciate that as I go through this presentation as well. So pasture dairying, as we've heard today, is tops. It's tops from an environmental point of view, it's tops from a profitability point of view. But we've got some challenges connecting that to consumers. We've got some challenges connecting that to politicians. We've got some challenges connecting that to all sorts of influences that we need to. And we've got some really, really critical information that they need to connect to. So over the last few days, since I spoke in Hamilton on Monday, there's been a debate in the media about carbon emissions, and particularly methane. And there's been a debate, should we include methane? If we include methane in our net zero targets, what's the global warming potential of it, etc., etc., etc. During that discussion, nothing was mentioned about the relativity. How much methane do we actually produce here in New Zealand compared to the rest of the world? What effect did that have? More importantly, there was no context about the benefits that's produced with that methane. None included in that debate, about the great nutrition that comes with those methane emissions. So how can you have a debate if you're not having the debate in a holistic sense? So I'm going to just take you through that today. So bear with me. I'm not going to dwell on this because we've heard many times today about this demand for protein, this demand for nutrition, and we're in a sweet spot. But it's something we shouldn't take for granted, particularly as there are certain sectors that are trying to take this off us, the plant-based substitutes, for example. Now, I don't think they're going to have anything like the impact that they will be claiming to be having. But don't think about it in terms of volume, think about it in terms of value. These guys are selling milk for $4, $6 a litre. We're not able to do that, or if we do, it's quite limited the categories we can have it in. We're not putting through the messaging. In part because, some of these substitutes are claiming that their environmental footprint is better. Now, agriculture as a whole is responsible for about 24% of global emissions. Now, that is often misinterpreted, that livestock's responsible for 24% of emissions, or even dairy is responsible for 24% of emissions. And I'm going to come back to that, because it's nothing like that. The other thing is, when we even talk about nutrition and we talk about this demand for protein, we talk about protein. Now, protein is not the same. There are different proteins. And from a nutritional point of view or bioavailability point of view, they are very different. And actually, this is endorsed by the UN through the Food and Agricultural Organization, that there is a better way of assessing protein quality than the methods that are currently used. So it isn't just about the amount of protein, it's the quality of that protein. What does quality mean? It means the nutritional quality when you eat it. Just how bioavailable is it? How does it get to your muscles? How does it promote muscle growth? How does it promote a whole range of bodily functions that are dependent on protein? And so there's been some work done to show just how superior dairy is. So if you use this correct methodology that really assesses the true quality of protein, then dairy comes out on top. And it comes out on top quite considerably compared to some of those plant-based substitutes, which you see here. So when they're claiming that they're using less land and less water, etc., they're not taking account of the quality. And when that's just done on greenhouse gases and protein, as I'll come to later, it's a very narrow perspective of the broad benefits that come from milk. So let's just have a look at land use. So there's about 5 billion hectares of land is used to produce all the food that is consumed in the world. And that's split roughly 50-50 between plant-based nutrition, so that's land used to produce plants that we consume, or part thereof. And that's the important point, because because a lot of plant material that we consume contains the production system creates a lot of biomass that we can't consume, but fortunately ruminants can. And there's about 2.5 billion hectares used by the livestock industry to produce animal-based nutrition. But the critical point is that about 2 billion hectares of that is in pasture and rangelands. Now, it's not the pastures that we've been talking about today in the main. It's not your islands or New Zealand. It's nowhere near as efficient, as you'll see when I get to the average greenhouse gas emissions. But the critical point is there's not that much of that that's convertible to plant-based nutrition that we can eat. So of that 2 billion hectares, only around 700 million can be converted to plant-based nutrition. So if we take out livestock, as is being promoted by some extreme views out there, we are going to have a real problem in two ways. One is just the amount of land that is going to be available for plant-based nutrition to substitute that livestock-based nutrition. And what do you do with the waste biomass from plant-based production system? And that's really emphasised down the bottom there. Dairy cows globally utilise about 20% of the world's agricultural land, so about 1 billion of those hectares. But they consume a massive amount of human inedible materials in the process of producing the most comprehensive, from a nutritional point of view, food that is available. It is the only thing designed in nature, milk is the only thing designed in nature for consumption by humans, or mammals in a more general sense. Nothing else is. Right? It has another primary purpose. Milk is produced for the purposes of being a nutrient. So I don't buy the arguments we shouldn't be consuming milk. I think there's a hell of a lot stronger argument to consuming milk than trying to milk an almond, for example. We also hear this, but the footprint of dairy is terrible. Well, that's when you use the average. Or it's when you look at the extremes. So what you see here are sheep, goats, cows. We've done quite a lot of work on what our footprint is in Fonterra, on our farms, our China farms, our New Zealand farms, and we've compared that against 17 full life cycle assessments, the proper ones, by the way, that are in published journals, and not the ones promoted by startup companies, which you can't get hold of the actual data that they're using. And what you see is this massive variation in dairy. And the top end actually does produce a lot of emissions. Emissions are not the only thing, and I'll come to that a little later. But what you can clearly see from this figure is that at the lower end, and you've got the European average dot there, and you've got the New Zealand dot there. They're equivalent to, or better than those substitutes. And this is not the message that's going to consumers at the moment. We need to get this out. We're going to publish this in a reputable journal, actually, because I think it needs to be published and then promoted. But that's less than half the story, because that's just on a fluid basis, comparing a litre per litre. But if you actually compare the nutrient content in these products with the nutrient content in milk, and then do your greenhouse gas calculations, the best substitutes have twice the emissions of milk on a nutrient basis. Again, we need to get that out. Moreover, and it was done since I actually submitted this presentation for this meeting, we've since calculated the cost of the nutrients in those substitutes. And they cost between 3 and 30-fold more than the nutrients in dairy. So if you're buying the calcium, the protein, the vitamins, some of those substitutes, they're 30 times more expensive on that nutrient basis. So you're getting at least twice the greenhouse gas emissions. And you've got to be a mutt to buy them on a nutritional basis. So let's take another perspective. And this comes back to my opening point about the perspective of greenhouse gas emissions here in New Zealand. So what you see here are all global man-made or man-associated emissions. You see the 24% for agriculture. You see the 2 to 3% for dairy. That's the real number. By the way, these are FAO figures, Food and Agricultural Organisation, the UN, not ours. And then you've got the New Zealand government figures, which are also accepted by the UN, of 0.16% of emissions. By the way, that's New Zealand's entire emissions, not dairy, not agriculture, in entirety. Of that, agriculture, sure, is half here in New Zealand, which is somewhat atypical. I think it's 33% in Ireland. And dairy, Fonterra emissions have gone to 0 on there, but it's not shown. Is about half. Fonterra emissions are about, dairy is about half again, and Fonterra emissions are about 80% of those. But the point is, on a global basis, they are in the margin of our ability to actually calculate emissions. And whilst I totally support the New Zealand's commitment to the Paris Agreement and our need to do our bit for reducing global emissions, I think we've got to be careful that we do that in a way that is still going to put food on the table, and quality food on the table, and the most emissions efficient food on the table. And therefore, I think the biggest contribution we can make is through the technology that we develop to reduce emissions, or moreover, the practices that we implement to improve the way that we farm in order to make ourselves more emission efficient. This isn't just about silver bullet solutions to emissions. It's about a combination of science and technology and practice. That is the biggest contribution we can make if some of those practices, some of those technologies are globally deployable to the other 24% of emissions that occur out there. That's the way we make the difference. And it's just not appearing in the media here, that message. Then the argument is, but dairy is not healthy. It's got all these negative things. You'll have a heart attack from the saturated fat. And despite the fact that the science turned around on that about a decade ago, it's proven hard to get this message through to everybody. And the message is quite compelling, actually. If people did consume the recommended daily intakes of milk, there are significant health benefits. And there have been half a dozen studies that have been done, including the US and Australia, where they've looked at what would be the effect on the healthcare budget had people consumed the recommended daily intakes of dairy. And it's hundreds of billions of dollars US. Well, just across the ditch, the calculation they did there, and this was done by CSIRO, was $2 billion Australian dollars a year, just by consuming the recommended intake of dairy as part of a balanced diet. And why might that be? Because dairy's got some great stuff in it, and you've heard a lot about that. And actually, really good news is pasture-based dairy's got a little bit more of that stuff, or sometimes quite a bit more. And so there's this thing called conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, and it's been found to do a range of positive things, including help you maintain a healthy body weight, which can lead to a whole range of health benefits associated with metabolic syndrome, low risk of type 2 diabetes, etc. Now, why therefore do we have this nonsense about saturated fat? Well, this goes back to a tale of two scientists in the late 50s and 60s. There was a guy called John Yudkin, who was at the University of London, and Ansel Keys at the University of Minnesota. And John Yudkin produced the correlation there, which is that zigzag between the points, where he said, look, there seems to be a correlation between sugar consumption and cardiovascular disease. But it's only a correlation, and you shouldn't, correlation is not causative, you shouldn't take cause and effect, but it is worthy of a lot more study. Now, because it was, he was not extremely well funded, and in fact didn't get a lot more funding to pursue that, that kind of dropped off the radar, which is a real shame, because actually the science is now turning to the fact that he was probably somewhat right, and I say somewhat. On the other hand, Ansel Keys produced those rather beautiful curves that you see between saturated fat consumption and heart disease. So the more saturated fat you consume in a country, the more heart disease, or the higher the heart disease rate in those countries. And he became very famous by this. He was already quite famous, which helped when he produced it. So Ansel Keys produced the K ration for the US troops in World War II, which was his contribution, if you want, to the war effort, which also contained a packet of cigarettes. And by all estimates, he addicted 2 million previously non-smoking Americans to tobacco. That's a statistic that has been shared. Anyway, that's I've reproduced his curve. That's that bottom curve, which is, I think it's a 49-year-old age group almost. And so that's what he published. But following the publication, this was what was revealed about the data he actually had. Somewhat harder to draw that curve. It's actually there if you look hard. Now, this became known, but Ansel Keys and his team came up with a reason why every one of the points that wasn't included on the curve could be discounted. For example, the French lie about their heart disease rate, and so on. The other thing was that that curve goes through 0, and that should have been a warning sign. That said no saturated fat, no heart disease. And it's very rare to see those sorts of effects at all. Now, this led to a whole series of studies that have been performed since that then attempted to confirm this position, but not definitively. And over the last 10 years, evidence has been building and building and building to the contrary. And in 2016, there was a review of all of that evidence. And it's quite conclusive for dairy that there are a range of benefits and few adverse effects, including cardiovascular disease. In fact, what it turns out is certainly to 2 to 3 serves of dairy a day, whole fat dairy reduces the rate of cardiovascular disease. And that's been shown in a number of studies now. So one of the main Achilles heels, or previously thought to be Achilles heels of the dairy sector about health attributes, and particularly saturated fat, would appear to be bogus. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is the UN and all the member countries of the UN's commitment to sustainability. And it's a 15-year program running between 2015 and 2030 with some pretty ambitious targets in 17 areas and 169 goals. I think it's very ambitious actually, but it's our best friend, dairy. Because when you take this full picture of what you need to have for sustainability, it's not just about emissions. They are an important part of it. It's about the full suite of things you need to be sustainable. Then dairy has a really critical role to play. And that resulted in the UN, through the Food and Agricultural arm of the UN, signing this Dairy Declaration with the International Dairy Federation in 2016, where it talks about the critical contribution of the dairy sector to sustainability, the essential role that it plays in diets, the major contribution to economies, and I'm going to come back to that, and its key function, therefore, in terrestrial management. And the reason is, number one, as I mentioned, there's 1 billion hectares of land in dairy. In aggregate, dairy farmers around the world, be they scale farmers or smallholders, have a lot of land under your stewardship that needs to be managed appropriately. And we were talking about how we can do that better in many of the presentations today. But that billion hectares is associated with a billion livelihoods, and this is really, really important, and is not well understood. So there are a billion people globally whose livelihoods are primarily derived from the dairy sector. And that is all of the on-farm employment, where you've got 133 million farms, about 600 million people living or deriving their livelihoods from those farms, and about 400 livelihoods supported off-farm. In total, 240 million jobs, which makes actually dairy the largest employer globally as well. Now, a lot of that's in smallholdings, though. So, staggeringly, looking at the stats, there's only 0.3% of the global dairy sector in farms that have over 100 cows. A lot of it is in much, much smaller farms or smallholders. And I would argue that often when we're talking about efficiency and emissions and all the environmental factors, if you look at it on a global scale, we're barking up the wrong trees. Not barking up the wrong trees in terms of the improvements we can make, but some of the pressures we put on. I think if we embrace the fact that we all need to improve, and I think all chains do need to improve, but it's about leveraging the best practices from the most efficient farmers in the world, which by all evidence points to pasture-based dairy, where appropriate, to other dairy farming systems. Now, part of the problem is, and I'll come back to questions at the end about this, so I'll give you a minute to study the diagram. It's my favourite. The problem is it's bloody complex. And people are modelling this complex global food system and coming out with all sorts of messages about it. And it's not helping us in the main, because they're all partial. So as a group of New Zealand organisations, and I've been part of this in my Redette role, have got together to try and create a better model. And we're developing this model, although it's starting to already throw out some very useful information. We'll be developing this for a while. And we haven't looked to 2050, we've looked to 2030, because in 2030 we're going to have another 1.1 billion people. And that's biologically, as you know, around the corner, and socially around the corner. How are we going to do that? And how are we going to be on the right path by 2030 so that when we do get to 2050, we have a sustainable food system and hopefully a sustainable world? Now, previous models have fallen short, they've been oversimplified, they've had no consideration of the change, often by pointing at 2050 and saying, well, things will change to get here. And they also seek to be definitive, and the complexity of the system makes it very, very difficult to be definitive. It's not one thing or the other. Not surprisingly, it's a balance. The key thing is to oversimplify nutrition. Energy equals nutrition, all proteins are the same, which I showed you at the start, it isn't, and critically they avoid bioavailability. In terms of nutrition, if it's not bioavailable, it's not that useful to you. And it's missing from just about, well, it's missing from all the models today. And this is a key feature of the model we've been developing. The other thing is this which I mentioned earlier, assuming land is interchangeable between systems. It just isn't. I mean, you all know that as farmers in the room, but it's often missing from these models. We also miss the cultural change. Certain diets are just not going to be acceptable to consumers. So I don't think, personally, this vegan movement is going to grow substantially, but let me just, remember about premiums now, not about whether it's going to take out milk. It's currently about 1 to 3%, depending on where you are in the world. But what if it got to 5%? And what if you do have 10 billion people by 2050? That's the population of Western Europe. And if the population of Western Europe is prepared to pay $6 per litre of milk for those products, that's a huge opportunity when this at the premium end. So I don't think it's about Armageddon for milk, but I do think it's about value that we're missing out on. And as I mentioned, definitive answers. I mean, no more beef or alcohol. What a future. Everyone must be a vegetarian, everyone must be a vegan. They do grab the headline, right? The sort of more balanced view is harder to publish. So we're going to have to think about how we first publish this material and then promote it, we're going to have to promote it with our gloves off. I think it's going to be much punchier than a scientific balanced argument. Now, the approach we've taken is different, which is, yes, it's got to be simpler than that complex picture I showed at the start. But it can't be oversimplified to the point where it's not going to give you the right picture. And so what we've done is this is why I like this quote from Einstein, everything needs to be as simple as possible, but not simpler. Otherwise you're going to get the wrong answers. The other thing that we've been really conscious to do is to use publicly available data building this model. So we've used two primary data sources, the Food and Agricultural Organisation of the FAO for production data, just how much food is produced, and the US Department of Agriculture data for what's in food. And we've been working through that data set of what's in food with all the literature about the bioavailability of those nutrients from those different food types, and we've looked at 181 food types at the point of consumption and then linked those back to what's produced on land. It's been a massive mathematical exercise, quite frankly. And we've done that from the point of view of looking at the four capitals. What I mean by that, well, firstly, again, emphasise this bioavailability. This is a really unique aspect of the model. And it's so critical because the one thing that won't change over the next 1,000 years, never mind the next dozen or so years through to 2030, is the bioavailable nutrients the human population requires to live will remain the same in 12 years or 1,000, because as a human, we just don't evolve that quickly. We're going to have that same nutrient requirement. And therefore, if not modelling on the basis of bioavailability is just plain wrong. And we're not trying to be definitive, because it is actually complicated. It's about understanding the picture and making the right decisions when you can see the true context. It does throw up some rather interesting answers, but in and of themselves, they still need to be considered in the full context. And despite the simplification, it's still a complicated model, but it's far more comprehensive than being produced. So we're looking at a range of inputs, including the land, the energy, the capital, water use, a range of outputs that include both the nutrition, but also the economic outputs. Remember, there are 1 billion people supported by the dairy sector. The number one is that the dairy sector delivers the highest amount of value in the agricultural sector. That value is then distributed and supports those 1 billion livelihoods. It would be immoral not to consider that dimension in the model. Also impractical, I think, if you don't consider that. We are looking at a limited number of environmental factors at this point in time. We can add more in the future. So we're looking at, obviously, carbon emissions or carbon emissions equivalent and water quality. So water use on one end, water quality on the other. We're looking at other outputs. So there's quite a lot of waste in the system. About 1/3 of the food produced globally isn't consumed. That's another important factor. And then there are some co-products that come out of the food system. And in some cases, they're not trivial. They're not trivial in amount, and often not trivial in their economic contribution. When it comes to those bioavailable nutrients, we've modelled this for 4 different population groups. Young children, adolescents, men and women, because they do have different bioavailability nutrition needs. And we put all that together in a model. And the other unique feature of this model is you can play with it. Eventually we will put this in the public domain. And what you see here is a top-level simplified view of the model, which shows animal, plant, seafood, and alternative agriculture. Now, the alternative agriculture is those things you hear about, fermentation, or the impossible burger, those sorts of things. We actually have got no data included on that at the moment, because it's lacking. And when you look at what's available on the startup websites, it doesn't, at the moment, it's not robust enough to include in the model. It's going to be an important element moving forward for some of the food system, we think, but clearly not all. So you can move these up and down and look what happens to all the nutrients. You can look what happens to greenhouse gases. You can look what happens to land use. and you can look at what happens to them all together. The nutrients you can look at from a bioavailability perspective. Now, what that enables you to do is not communicate to consumers, but it enables people to get involved in the right discussion, the right thinking for those people that do need to be making the right policy decisions and taking the right actions. And ultimately, hopefully through getting groups, such as the University of Oxford, which is coming out with quite an anti-animal stance in some of its material it publishes, to embrace this and to perhaps recalibrate some of the advice that they're providing. Thank you very much.